And what we were discussing was taking the time every day to focus on God, to really think about God. Like ideally in the morning, your brain is fresh, maybe it's quiet, maybe it's not when it gets quiet, and take the time to think about God and to feel his presence and to feel his power and to feel your response, your reverence, your respect, your fear, your awe, and then go live your life. Pray, study, work, shop, clean. We all got a long list. And as you're living your life, as you're serving God in your life, your service will be different because it'll be flavored by this relationship, by this fear. And if it starts fading, like, we're human and we get distracted and life gets in the way and we forget what we were thinking about 5 minutes ago, let alone a few hours ago, just stop and sort of breathe and go into that space. It'll come right back. Because since it's a muscle that you really work through, if at some point you lose it, just go in and you'll get it right back. And at this point, we're now sort of going to circle back to the beginning of the chapter. Because if you remember, which I'm sure you all do, the chapter opened with a verse. God said, Ma Hashem Elokecha Shomei Machkim Liyira. What's God asking from you? Just to fear him. And then the Talmud said, really? Just to fear him? Is fearing God such a small thing? And the Talmud answered, well, for Moses, it's a small thing. And we were like, huh? We get the question. Yes, it does not seem a small thing to fear God, but we don't get the answer. How does it help that for Moses, for Moshe, it's a small thing? So what? And what we developed throughout the chapter was because he is inside of us. Because every single one of us has a bit of him. He is, as it says in the Zohar, foundational Kabbalistic work, he is called Raya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd. He's faithful. He's loyal to his flock, to us. He's inside each one of us. He's feeding our faith. He's feeding our da'as that we discussed at length this chapter. That means our connectivity, that we don't just know, but we feel what we know. And when we feel what we know, we will all have a fear of God. And we're going to bring out another point, reanalyzing the teensy drop, that initial verse. And we put the two factors together, the Moses factor that we discussed at length this chapter, and another concept that we're going to say now. We'll say, oh, I don't know if I'd call it small, but it's doable. So we are in chapter 42. We're on page 120. We are 6 lines from the bottom. Zesh. Shamar Kasuv, and this is what the verse says, Ki im liyira esavai elokecha. We're going back to our original verse. What does God ask from you? Only to fear God, your God. Aleches b'chol durachav, to go in all his ways. What did we add now? What was the new subtle nuance of thought that the Alter Rebbe brought in? The Alter Rebbe is saying, by continuing the verse, in other words, the verse as we know it, the famous quote, excerpt from the verse is, what does God ask from you? Only to fear him. And they were like, only? But the Rebbe says, that's not the end of the verse, actually. The verse says, what does God ask from you? Only to fear him, to go in his ways. So the Rebbe says, aha. When the verse is talking about fearing God, it doesn't mean the ultimate expression of fear of God, which is actually a very, very, very high spiritual service. The ultimate expression, fear, 21st century America might have some negative connotations, but true fear of God is a very sublime spiritual level. True fear of God means complete nullification to God, complete transparency to God, God flowing through you and you not taking up the space, complete awe and an awareness of his presence. That's a really high level service. And we can't say about that, what is God asking you? Only to fear him. Excuse me, that's a very high level service. It is. But the Alter Rebbe says, that's not what the verse means. That's not what the verse is saying. The verse says, to fear him, meaning, let me define what I mean by fear him, to go in his ways. So what we're asking for here is enough of an emotional relationship to serve. Again, there's the emotion, so to speak, in a vacuum, the pure emotion, the purity of the emotion, which is a very high level service and is accessible and takes a lot of work. And then there's the functional level. The functional level is, and this is a new point, we did not yet know this in the chapter, the Rebbe is just introducing this now. The functional level is enough emotion to get you to do what you got to do in this, because we're in this world to connect to God. We're in this world to serve God. We're in this world to make this world God's home. So I need the emotion, practically speaking, as the catalyst to fuel and keep moving my service. And that is what's referred to as the lower fear. Lower because it's not this sublime, high, pure spiritual experience, but it's an emotion that engenders a response. And the response is, I serve. I feel God's presence and I serve. I feel God's presence. I'm like sitting up a little more in my seat. I feel God's presence and maybe I'm a little bit more on the edge of my seat. I feel God's presence and I'm going to say blessing. And I'm going to say blessing after I eat. And maybe I'm going to open up a prayer book or a bencher, as we call it, to look inside when I say that blessing because I feel God's presence, because I'm in tune. So it's enough of an emotion to get me to do what I need to do in this world. This is very similar if someone has a very good memory, because we're in chapter 42, long time ago. In chapter 17 of Tanya, the Rebbe brought a very similar concept when he spoke about this foundational verse of all of Tanya. The matter is very close to you, in your mouth and your heart to do it. We're again very close. That means very near. That means very accessible. The matter, complete service of God. Complete service of God doesn't seem so near, close, and accessible. It has to be bilvavcha la'asoso. In your heart, enough to get you to do. In your heart purely, that's hard. In your heart enough to do, that's doable. So if anyone remembers that concept that was developed at length in the beginning of chapter 17, now in chapter 42, the Rebbe is bringing in a very similar idea. The verse again said, what's God asking you? Only to fear him? Only to go in his ways. And now we can combine both answers. Remember, the original point we said only to fear him? And the Talmud said, well, for Moses, that's not a big deal. We're like, so you have Moses inside of you. He's feeding you. You can do it too. And now analyzing this verse, to fear him, to go in his ways, I need enough fear to get me to do what I got to do. So if I combine both of these answers, what is the verse saying? I need a certain practical tool of emotion, of fear of God, and I have Moses's power to help me achieve it because it's inside of me already. Because we all have that degree of emotion implanted in our very soul. So what do I need Moses for if it's implanted in my soul? Because through the power of Moses, which again, remember, that's the da'as factor, the connectivity from the concept to the emotion, I can reveal, I can uncover, I can feel what's embedded in my soul. And since I'm not asking for the moon here, I'm asking for a doable level of emotion, and I have Moses' help, and it's implanted in my soul. It actually is something we can all achieve, and something we actually all need to achieve. Because as we said for chapters previously, 37, 38, 39, we need this. This is what our service needs. If we're doing our service on automatic pilot, routine, rote, it's empty. It's actually not going anywhere. So we need this emotion and we can achieve it. So that was overarching what we're going to be discussing now, this new point in the chapter that we didn't get until now, but when we take this plus everything we said thus far, it actually is doable. Shehi Yira, that when we're saying to fear God, to go in his ways, meaning to go in his ways is modifying to fear. What type of fear? Enough to go in his ways. So this means a fear that will bring us to God. What does it mean to God? To fulfill his commandments. We'll have enough fear of God to hold back from what he prohibits, to do what he needs from us. Is that the highest level? No, but that's okay. It's enough for me to be a true servant of God. And that's why we're in this world. And this type of fear is what Kabbalistically is referred to as a lower fear. If you're looking inside or if you're familiar somewhat, that term is actually Aramaic. As you can see, tata ends with an aleph, and it means the lower fear, as versus this very, very high, complete awareness of God's presence, completely being subsumed in his energy, complete nullification to his will, complete transparency, which are all layers of the upper fear, referred to Kabbalistically as Yira Ila'ah. That's a lot of work. But Yira Tata, this we can all do. Ulagabe Maisha, and again, bringing in the Moses factor. Now that I'm saying, wait, chill, don't worry. It's only Yira Tata. And remember, you got Moses' help. And for Moshe, and again, the Moshe is inside of me. We have that Moshe energy in every soul. Truly, it's a small thing. Meaning, was Moses on the level of the upper fear? Of course he was. Absolutely. But we wouldn't call it small. And we wouldn't say that we're naturally able to acquire it because he has it. But this is doable. And not only is it doable, I have it buried in my soul. And now that I have it buried in my soul, I have Moses' energy feeding me with the dots, with the connectivity that from what I'm learning, what I'm studying, what I'm contemplating, this will resonate with an emotional response. So I put all this together, it is doable. Sometimes you're like, oh, I don't want to be so doable because then I really need to do it. It's a little bit easier to think, oh, this is impossible because then like I'm totally off the hook. The rabbi says, no. We're actually asking for something very doable. Now you have to go do it. And now the Rebbe is, if you will, reminding us, we are up to a parenthesis. So this is parenthetical because we're speaking about this Moses quality, what Moses is feeding us. And we said he's feeding us da'as. And da'as, as we've explained it, is to integrate what you know. We can have, and probably we all have a lot of knowledge about many areas of life, but the knowledge and the me are two separate things. And das is that connectivity, that integration, that internalization. So what I know becomes me. Because if my knowledge of God becomes me, if I've integrated into my psyche, if I'm one with it, then automatically my feelings will be revealed. And especially as we're saying, because we have them anyway, we just need to reveal them. Automatically my feelings will be revealed. And that's why das is such a key factor here. Because if I don't have the das, I could have all this buried feeling, which will stay buried. And I can have all this knowledge of God, which will stay knowledge of God. But we're not acquiring knowledge of God in a vacuum to have knowledge of God. Our goal is not to be a theologian. Our goal is not to be a professor. Our goal is that the knowledge helps me be an Eved, be God's servant, be an Ovid, be someone who's constantly working on his relationship with God. So for knowledge to be useful, it's not enough to have the knowledge. I need to feel the knowledge. And that feeling the knowledge is the da'as factor. I believe I said this recently in this class, but maybe it was another class, that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe said, I think it was like in the 1940s when he was writing America, might have been in the 1930s in Europe though, but he said, again, either in the 30s or the 40s, the previous generations, they knew far less and they lived it far more. Now if that was the oi of the 1930s or 1940s, could you imagine what the oi of 21st century America is? But what did he mean? Well, clearly there were some great people that studied and learned, and that was their whole life, and they knew far more than us. But most people actually might have known less than us. But whatever little they knew, they lived. And that changed them completely. And that's the das factor. We have like the challenge of wealth of what's really wealth, Torah. Knowledge and knowledge of Torah is the ultimate wealth. But having all of that knowledge, it's sometimes a little, you can get so caught up in the knowledge that you don't get to the point of it, which is to internalize the knowledge, to integrate it. And how do you know if you've really integrated it? If there's an emotional response. So instead of like swallowing vast oceans of knowledge, we want to take just a little chunk, a little piece that really resonated, and just try to really, really focus on that, to really feel it. And that's das, and that will change us. So the Rebbe explains this in the parentheses. Shadas, that this factor of das, which we say is what Moshe is feeding us, hu hamikasher, this is what connects matzpune binas halev, what's in the hidden recesses of the understanding of the heart, el bechinas giloi, to a state of revelation, the machshava mamish, not from the inner hidden recesses submerged in your heart, but to be a conscious thought in your mind. And of course, from there to be a revealed feeling in your heart, as is known to those that know the esoteric knowledge, the knowledge of Kabbalah. So again, we have three things we're looking at. One, the big innovation of today. I'm not asking for ultimate fear. I'm asking for functional fear. Two, reminder, Moses is feeding me das, which is going to aid me to get this, because three, I already have this feeling buried inside my soul. As we're saying here, buried in the recesses of the understanding of my heart. I need to get to it. I need to extract it, feel it, open it up. So I put all three together. It's a doable level, which actually I already possess, and which through the aid of Moses, I can extract. And what's the tool of extraction? Da'as. Because through da'as, that's the faculty that as I learn, take a little bit and think about it, focus on it, think into it, feel it. And that integration will now allow you to uncover from what's in your hidden recesses of the heart to your conscious mind, back to your conscious heart. Any questions, any thoughts on any of the above? Because I know we just went through a long monologue.
I wanted to mention that, you spoke about that and actually doing, and, being, my mom from Morocco. So they didn't get educated over there. They lived by what they learned from their parents, etc., etc. And, so I tell Joseph many things right now that my mom was doing and teaching me. And it's really incredible because she did not really read the Torah. Women in Morocco were not educated in Torah. We just started doing it when we came to Israel. But yet they did. I mean, the way that they kept the mitzvot and all the minhagim and everything was really, it's like they did it. You know what I mean? But they didn't have the knowledge, but they did it.
You're absolutely right. And I've even had women who were from the former USSR saying things they remember their grandmothers or even their mothers doing. And then when they came out and when they started studying, and they're like, oh, that's what I saw my grandmother doing. Now, clearly she didn't get an education in this, thinking the time that she was around and the culture in Russia at that time. But somehow something passed on from her mother, from her mother, from her mother, and she's doing what I'm now learning about that I didn't even realize has a significance. I just thought it was something she did. And now I understand why. And I think you're absolutely right. And that is truly how, for generations, really, the heritage, the richness, the depth, the connectivity to God passed on. There is a long story. I'm not going to say it. I'm just going to reference it for those that know, of a chassid, of a follower of the early Rebbes of Chabad, who was given a certain instruction: better to be a wagon driver than a rabbi, than a rav. And at a certain point later in his life, when a community came and asked him to be a rav, he remembered that instruction: better to be a wagon driver than a rav. He's like, well, wagon driver. I couldn't probably have been a wagon driver when I was younger, and now I'm an old man. What in the world could this possibly mean? This was an instruction he received from the first Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, now the story of the times of the next Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, his son. It was just like, whatever, obviously not relevant. And his wife heard this and was like, well, of course, the Rebbe wants you to be a wagon driver, and I'll sell my jewelry so you can get a wagon, so you can be a wagon driver. And the story continued, and it's a very powerful story that I'm not going to say. But this was an elder chassid, a very wise, a very learned follower of the first Rebbe of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, and the second Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, who was very knowledgeable in Torah in general and in the inner dimension of Torah specifically. And here was his wife, who had a very minimal education, but she had a relationship to God that he said, wow, she's ahead of me. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. There was definitely always the Masorah. There was a transmittance from mother to daughter, to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation. And in pure times, there really was a very strong relationship with God that wasn't coming from knowledge because they didn't have knowledge, but was coming from their soul. Now, we don't necessarily live in as pure times, and we are fortunate to have the knowledge. And through the knowledge, we can also access this purity of soul. But in previous generations, maybe they circumvented some of the things we need to do because they lived in a different world and they had a different accessibility to the inner resources of their soul. So you are absolutely right. Absolutely.
I don't think that I could do what my mom did. I mean, I watched her doing, but I needed to know. I needed to learn. So for me, education is part of my being Jewish.
And it is. And it's sort of resonating in my head. It says in the Talmud that one should not teach their daughters Talmudic thought. And the reason why is because women naturally have a very strong, pure belief and relationship with God. And Talmud is very analytical. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of responses, rebuttals, proofs, knockdowns. And that type of thinking chips away at that pure belief. And therefore, the sages said, the women are ahead of the game. They have such a belief in God, don't mess. They don't need Talmud. Now, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, a woman wants to learn Talmud, she should learn Talmud. Why? He's not honoring the sages of the Talmud who said no. He says it's a different world. And in our world today, unfortunately, that pure belief has been affected by many other thoughts and questions and analysis and maybe skepticism or cynicism or many other things. So if we already a bit lost the advantage, we should for sure take advantage of the wealth of Talmudic thought to help us have that relationship with God. So definitely in the world we live in now, it's very vital to know God. And as we know God, we can access our feelings that we have, but that are buried. But we can access them through the knowledge. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on this?
I'm just wondering, like, there was a lot in what you just gave over, and like the action, like connecting to the Moshe, that just the main thing is the doing. You can have enough fear just to do what Hashem wants you, but then you're kind of saying, but that's not enough. You have to have the emotional connection. You have to have the das. You can't just have, okay, I have enough awe or enough fear that I'm going to do what I have supposed to do, but you have to, like, it has to be deeper than that. There's like a bridge, that little bridge of going from, I'm just going to do what you want. I'm just going to do what you want because, I know you want me to do it, to a place like, no, you got to be happy about this. You have to have feeling. You can't just like, okay, but I'm just doing, right? But that's not enough. So there is like that bridge that, like when I'm often doing what I'm supposed to do, and I'm not always feeling happy or excited about it. Like, but you're saying that it's not enough. You have to have the bridge of the das, right?
I think the point is that there's a lot of different aspects of our service. And I think it's okay if we're not always excited about everything, because I think there's a value to that also. And there's a value to say, God, personally, I don't know if I'd be choosing to do this. I'm not, using Fruma's language, excited about it. I'm not enjoying it. It actually is difficult for me. It actually is hard for me. I'm actually not wanting it. It actually makes me nervous. But I know it's your will. And because it's your will, I'm doing it. And that is us in our servant, slave, soldier mode. And there's a value to that. There's a tremendous value to that. But it's not enough. It's almost like this dichotomy, but it's not a dichotomy. God just wants it all, and we're very multifaceted. And every facet God wants, and every facet we have as a means of connection to Him. So we do have this aspect of like, I really don't want to do this. Breathe. This is your will. You know, maybe a really annoying person comes knocking at your door. It's really hard for you. You breathe. You focus on that, you know, God would really love you to embrace this soul, and you smile and connect and do exactly what God wants because He wants it, not because He wants it at all. And that's beautiful. That is beautiful. But that's not enough. That can't be the entirety of your relationship. It could be one aspect of your relationship, and you could use it for certain things that you can't get past that. And that's fine. And there's a beauty to that, and there's a strength to that. There really is. It's like we discussed in chapter 41, self-sacrifice. We said at the end of 41, self-sacrifice doesn't just mean dying for God in that one dramatic moment. Self-sacrifice could be sprinkled throughout our day. And that's self-sacrifice when you don't want to do it, but God wants and you do it. At the same time, God also gave you feelings for a reason. And God wants you, and this is of course foundational to Tanya, to use those feelings to connect to Him. So on one hand, at this moment, I'm doing things because I know it's your will, and that's the only reason I'm doing something. Beautiful. At the same time, I do have buried inside of me feelings. It's buried in our soul. Every Jew does. And we have Moses's help buried inside of us as well. So when I utilize that Moses power and I unearth my buried treasures, then I have the ability to serve with feeling, with passion. And that's also very beautiful. Which is more beautiful? They're different beauties, and they're both very important to God. I think also we mentioned recently this saying of the Baal Shem Tov, that he said every Jew is God's treasured land. And he wishes, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidus, is saying he wishes he could extract all the hidden treasures that are buried in every Jewish heart, in every Jewish soul. So we are Nova powerful people with enormous resources. And through the study we're doing, through the aid of Moses, through our own work, we can uncover our treasures and in parts of our service, fear, love, and be inspired to connect. And at the same time, in parts of our service, say, God, the fear and love aren't working for this situation. I know it's your will. I'm doing it for you. And they're both. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on this? Okay. So we are right after the parentheses, page Samach Aleph. V'oizos yiskar. Okay, so now the Rebbe is giving us another hook, another way to access this emotion for God. Now, as Fruma said, love, we're talking about fear, but the truth is she's right. We got to have both. Of course, in chapter 41 and 42, we're using the terminology of fear, but of course, we had 40 chapters where we were told we really have to love, and yes, we really need both. So there's something else we can think about that will help us access this emotion for God, and in this case, this fear of God, in a simpler way. Maybe it's easier. Now, for some of you might say that doesn't help me at all, and the previous thoughts were better. The Alter Rebbe is offering many different tools. This is very important. This is foundational to our service, and if this helps use this, and maybe tomorrow this will work better, and we use whatever we can. So something else we can remember. That just like in a human king, in a king of flesh and blood, Iker Hayira, a real fear of a human king, it's from his inner energy, from his vitality. We're not literally scared of the body. Because when he's sleeping, we're not scared of him. And behold, we can't see that inner energy, that vitality. Rak be'enei haseichel, but intellectually we could see it. Al yedei re'iyas enei basar b'gufav levushav, through my physical eyes, seeing his physical body and his physical clothing. Sheyodea, that the person knows by seeing the body of the king, that inside that body there's this energy which is evoking my. Now, this is a metaphor, so let's understand the metaphor before we unpack it to the point that how this is going to help us in thinking about God. We usually, very, very often, use the king as a metaphor for God, because every human king is metaphorical for God. As God is the ultimate king, so too do we have kings in this world. So the Rebbe said, if you had a human king, what are you fearing? Do you fear the king? Yeah, people would fear the king. Why are you fearing him? You're fearing him from his power, from his presence, for what he could do to you. You're not fearing his physical body. You're fearing him inside that physical body. As the Rebbe said, what's the proof? If he's sleeping, you're not scared. When the body's still there, well, the body's not going to do anything. You could say, well, what body would do if you're sleeping? But I guess in my mind, I'm thinking if there was this carnivorous lion around sleeping, I think you'd still be really scared. Well, it's sleeping. Yeah, but it could wake up in a snap. And you know what? Not anything you want to be anywhere near. Besides, like, through a screen. So by the lion, you're scared of the body. By a human king, you're scared of the persona inside that body. But you don't see the energy, the person. You see the body. Obviously, you probably don't see the body. He's probably not stark naked as you're looking at him. He's probably dressed. And in previous times, kings, I think it took Louis XIV like an hour to get dressed every day, King had to wear many, ceremonial robes and thises and that's to evoke, this sense of their stature as the king. So when you're looking, you're for sure not seeing his body. You have no clue what the body really looks like under all those garments. You're seeing the garments within which is a body, within which is that which is not visible to a physical eye, the person. And that's what you're fearing. So what's getting you to fear? Well, your physical sight of the body. But you're not scared of the body. If he's sleeping, I'm not scared of him. So why is my physical sight of the body evoking the fear of that which is inside the body that I can't see anyway? Because it reminds you. Because it triggers it. So when you see a human king, and you're seeing him, his face, his crown, his beard, his robes, and you are full of a sense of awe, you're full of a sense of fear, you're fearing what your mind's eye sees, not what your physical eye sees, but your physical eye, what it sees, the flesh, the clothing, the garments, the crown, that triggers your mind's eye to feel the presence behind all that and to feel the fear. So that's all a metaphor for us and God. It's not the only metaphor, obviously, but we're using it here in this very specific context of something else that could help me evoke this fear that I naturally have, but maybe I'm not in touch with. So again, I see the physical king. I can see him. I'm in a place. He's a big public ceremony. Me and thousands of other people are seeing him. I'm full of a sense of his presence. And that sense of his presence evokes a fear. But how do I see his presence? I don't. I see his body and his clothing. My mind's eye sees the presence triggered by my physical sight of the body and the clothing. I physically see the body and the clothing, and this lets me feel with my mind's eye the presence. And that presence is what leads to the fear. So now let's apply this to God, which is why we're discussing this. V'imkein, and if so, kacha, mamish, literally just like this, so to speak. Yesh lo liyare. A person should have fear as havaya of God. It's hard to fear what you don't see. Well, guess what? You're not seeing the power and persona of the king anyway. You're seeing the clothing. And then from there, you're feeling the presence behind the clothing. So similarly with God, when you, with your physical eyes, look at creation, look at heaven and earth, look at Niagara Falls, look at the powers of your cell phone today, look at enormous thunder or sunshine, look at anything that brings you to the sense of wonder and awe of the physical world around us. All the hosts. Anything in this physical reality that makes you feel, wow, wow. A newborn, a solar eclipse, whatever it is that makes you feel that sense of the wow of creation, from which you come to the far deeper wow of the Creator. Asher or ein sof baruch hu meluvash behem l'hachayosam. That the infinite light of God is within every tiny and wondrous aspect of all of creation to constantly give them life and existence. So hopefully that reality of our relationship to God, you clearly saw how the metaphor and what it stands for really works and can help us feel that fear. I'll just unpack it a little bit more in case it wasn't clear. I physically see a king. I physically see the garments of God, this world, right? I'm physically seeing the king. Well, I'm not only seeing his naked body. I'm seeing him as he's dressed, as he's on ceremonial display. So I'm, in essence, seeing a lot of garments. Not godly, royal garments. I'm seeing the royal garments of the king on his body. I'm seeing creation. I'm seeing the garments of God. Seeing that king gives me a sense of what I can't see. His power, his presence, which evokes my fear. Seeing what I can see, creation, whatever aspect of creation gives me the sense of wow, that like wow moment of creation. Seeing that with my mind's eye, this is creation. Imagine the creator who is within every aspect of creation, the king dressed in his garments, God dressed in creation. And when you think like that, you can very naturally feel the fear. So what the Rebbe is doing here is giving us another road. Meaning last week we discussed thinking about God, thinking about his presence, his power, his closeness, thinking more godly thoughts. And that works, and that's a powerful road, but it doesn't work for everyone. So the Rebbe says, I'm giving you another road. Which should you use? Use both. Use whatever works. Bottom line, we want you to have this fear of God. Use both, use one, use the other. Sometimes this will work, sometimes that will work. If thinking all the spiritual, mystical things don't work for you, think of this physical world, the Rebbe says. Think of anything in this physical world that evokes your awe. There's a lot in this physical world that can evoke your awe. A lot. Whatever. The perfection of a snowflake. Outer space. Whatever it is. And then realize, again, they're saying, don't need any deeper thought really than the person seeing the king. Realize, wow, this is the garments. Imagine the God inside the garments. Imagine the God power that's vivifying every one of these things that I see in my world, every single second, for 5,784 years and counting. Wow. And that can lead you naturally to a fear of God. You're like, but I still don't see him. The Rebbe says, but you don't see the power of the king either. You just see his garments too, basically. And that works for you. Look at the garments of God. Look at this world. It could work exactly the same way. Anybody here ever had like such an experience where they saw something? Again, it could be in the natural world or it could be in the technological world. It could be anything in our physical reality that really gave them a sense of like, wow, which translated to wow of God. Anyone ever had such an experience?
I think those are easy experiences to have because that's what we live in this world. Like to have, sometimes spiritual feelings or connections, but to see this awesome world is like that's like every day. Like all of us see and feel that. That's what we relate to because that's what we're physical in this physical world. So I think it's very tangible, very relatable.
Exactly. That's exactly the Rebbe's point. That's what Fruma said is exactly the point the Rebbe's making. This is supposed to be a very tangible road because we're human beings. We're physical human beings in a physical world. And maybe for not every one of us every day do we have those wow moments, but we probably all have had them. And some of us have them more. Some of us are more sensitive to them. Some of us are more like, like the childlike wow of life and of all the different things of life that can give you wow. Like that new ice cream that came out, whatever. Wow. What's going on in our world? Wow. A positive wow. A power wow. An unbelievable wow. And every time we have that experience, the Rebbe is saying, just take it the next step. The God who's within this wow. The God who's vivifying this in all the details. And if you think of all the different wows from that food to that little perfect flower to that natural wonder to that new technology, every different one, it more enhances, they're all complementary because it more enhances the wow of the God within everything. And from that space, we naturally can fear. So anyone else besides Frum has had these experiences or can relate to this thought or even on their own naturally connected that something in the physical world to a feeling of God who is vivifying and creating it?
Yes. Yes, I do. Hello?
Yes, Esther Yehudis, As You See Nature.
Yes. Yes, I'm very much into nature. And I think maybe part of it is because the feelings of the connection to Hashem, like it's just really amazing. We've got all this snow here, and no two snowflakes are alike. And like my little bird I have, it's really amazing because her feathers, okay, she's got big feathers, wing feathers, whatever, but those tiny little feathers that cover her face, when they come out, when you see one, and it's so tiny, it's like, I don't know, it's about as big as a sesame seed, and yet it's so perfectly fanned out and formed. There's that tiny speck of a feather on a little 3.5 ounce bird.
I think when we have that appreciation for nature, it is so easy to transfer it. Like you're saying, the world around us, so easy to transfer it. And again, for someone else, it could be an appreciation for all the stages and their children and their grandchildren. For children playing on a park bench. Like, there's so many different things in this world that can give us that sense of like, wow. And then right away, what you want to train your brain to do, what the Rebbe is saying, which is not hard, as Fruma said, it really isn't, because we are physical people and we have so many different wows of this world. Imagine God within the snowflake, within those feathers, within that child, within the weather, the storm. Ancient man gave all of these things, the God of the thunder and the God of the rain and the God of the earth, because all of these things evoke those feelings. It's really true. And we know there is the one God who is within all of them. So it is meant to be a tool that makes it easier. Does not knock everything we said until now. We're towards the end of chapter 42. Why don't we say this in the beginning? No. We need the whole road. But this is something else in your toolbox that you can use and just train yourself. as you see the world, to just always make that link, and the God within, and the fear, and the awe, and the wow.